The mail came on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just gotten back from my water aerobics class at the Y, and my hair was still damp when I saw his truck parked in the driveway. Not pulled up to the curb the way visitors do. Parked in the driveway, like he owned the place, like he'd been there before. I stood at the end of the walkway for a moment, my gym bag hanging off my shoulder, and I thought, here we go. My grandson was sitting on the porch steps with him, laughing, head tilted back, shoulders loose in that easy way he never was around me anymore. I hadn't heard him laugh like that in months. He looked up when he saw me, and the laugh stopped. That was the first thing that broke something in me, not what came later. That. His name is Caleb. He came to live with me when he was 7 years old, after my daughter Renata lost custody following her second DUI. The judge gave her 18 months to get stable. She never did. By the time Caleb turned 9, she had moved to Phoenix with a man I never met, and the postcards stopped coming around the same time his baby teeth did. I was 61 years old when I became a mother again. I want to be clear about what that means. I had already raised 3 children. I had already done the school pickups and the sick nights and the arguments about curfew. I had a paid-off mortgage, a modest pension from 31 years as an office administrator for the county, and a vegetable garden I had been waiting my whole working life to tend properly. I had plans. I set them aside. Caleb's bedroom had been my sewing room. I packed the fabric into bins and moved them to the garage. I registered him at Eastfield Elementary, 3 blocks away, and walked him there every morning for a year until he said he was old enough to go alone. I learned what a 504 plan was because his 3rd grade teacher said he had trouble with focus, and I sat in that school office and fought until they gave him the accommodations he needed. I drove him to occupational therapy every other Wednesday for 2 years. There was no child support. Renata had nothing to give, and I never pursued it because pursuing it would have meant keeping her in his life in a way that I didn't think served him. I paid for everything from savings, then from a part-time bookkeeping job I took on Friday mornings for a small dental practice. I was 63 years old, sitting in a dentist's waiting room doing accounts receivable on a laptop because my grandson needed sneakers and a winter coat and field trip money. I am not telling you this for sympathy. I am telling you so that you understand the arithmetic of what came later. By high school, Caleb was a different boy than the one who had arrived on my doorstep with a garbage bag full of clothes and a stuffed dog missing one eye. He was tall and quiet and quick, the kind of teenager who doesn't say much but notices everything. He made the junior varsity soccer team as a freshman. He had a group of friends I liked. Boys who said, "Yes, ma'am," when they came through my kitchen and cleaned up after themselves without being asked. I thought we had built something solid, not perfect. There were hard years. Years when he tested every boundary I set. Years when I cried after he went to sleep because I didn't know if I was doing any of it right. But solid. Built to last. I was wrong about that. Or maybe I was right, and someone just took a sledgehammer to it. His father showed up in March of Caleb's junior year. I hadn't heard the name Dwayne in 9 years. The last time I had, it was in a courtroom, where he had signed away his parental rights without so much as looking at the boy sitting 3 rows behind him. His attorney had submitted a single paragraph. He did not contest the termination. He wished the child well. That was it. That was the whole of it. Now here he was, on my porch in a Dodge Challenger with custom rims, looking like the years had been very good to him. He had a job in commercial real estate in Atlanta, he told me. He was doing well. He had gotten sober, found faith, rebuilt his life. He wanted to know his son. I said, "That's between you and Caleb." I meant it as a boundary. Caleb heard it as permission. The first weekend visit was supposed to be one night. Caleb came back Sunday evening with a new pair of Jordans and a duffel bag of Atlanta Falcons gear and a look on his face I hadn't seen before. Lit up. Like someone had handed him something he hadn't known he was missing until that exact moment. I told myself that was okay. It probably was, for a while. The visits stretched. One night became a long weekend. Long weekend became 2 weeks over spring break. Caleb started texting during dinner, and when I asked who he was talking to, he said just Dad, with the ease of someone who had been saying that word his whole life. He hadn't. It was brand new. It felt like watching someone try on a coat that had never belonged to them and deciding it fit perfectly. Dwayne had a fiancée named Simone and a condo in Buckhead and a life that, to a 16-year-old boy, probably looked like everything. He had courtside Hawks tickets and a home gym and a golden retriever named Cash. He had time, which is the one thing I could never give Caleb in the way a man with no real obligations could. What he did not have was 9 years. I kept that thought to myself. I kept a lot of thoughts to myself because I had learned from raising 3 children, from 67 years of living, that the things you say in anger have a way of outlasting the anger itself. But I noticed the changes. The way Caleb started referring to his bedroom as just a room, the way he stopped asking me to review his college essays and started saying his dad knew people in admissions. The way he answered my questions in shorter and shorter sentences, like I had become someone to manage rather than someone to talk to. And then one night in October, I made pot roast. His favorite, the same recipe I had been making since he was 8 years old. He sat down, looked at his plate, and said, "I've been thinking about something." I set my fork down. He didn't look at me. He looked at the window, at some point past my left shoulder, the way people do when they've rehearsed what they're about to say and they don't want eye contact to throw them off. He said, "I think I want to finish my senior year in Atlanta. Live with Dad full time." I kept my hands flat on the table. I said, "Okay. Tell me more about that." He said his father had a great school district, that Simone had connections to a soccer club with real scouts, that the opportunities were different there, that he felt like he could be more himself. He used that phrase twice, more himself. I asked, "What does that mean?" He finally looked at me. His jaw was set in the way it gets when he's made a decision and doesn't want to be talked out of it. "Grandma," he said, "you've done a lot for me. I know that. But you're not my real parent. You're my grandmother. I think it's time I lived with actual family." The room went very quiet. I thought about the garbage bag, the stuffed dog, the sewing room I gave away, the Friday mornings at the dental office when my hands ached from typing and I told myself it was fine, it was worth it, he needed what he needed, and I was the one who could give it. I thought about all the nights I sat on the edge of his bed after a nightmare and said, "I'm here, I've got you, you are not alone," until he fell back asleep. I said, "I hear you." Then I stood up, cleared my plate, and said, "Let me think about some things tonight." He looked surprised. I think he expected tears, or an argument, or both. I gave him neither. I went to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat in the chair by the window for a long time in the dark. I did not sleep. What I did instead was think very clearly. I had been paying for 3 things that were in my name and my name only. The first was his cell phone plan, which I had added him to 11 years ago and never removed because it never occurred to me to question it. $140 a month on a family plan that had only ever had 2 people on it. The second was his car insurance. He had been driving my old Camry since he got his license at 16, a car I had transferred into his name as a gift because I thought it would teach him responsibility. The insurance, however, had stayed in mine because he was a minor when I set it up and I had never gotten around to changing it. $212 every 6 months. The third was his college savings account. I had been contributing to it since he was 9 years old. Not much. $50 a month when I could afford it, more when I couldn't afford not to. By his junior year, it held a little over $14,000. It was a custodial account, which meant that I was the account holder until he turned 18. He would not turn 18 until February. It was October. I also called the guidance counselor at his school the next morning. Caleb had applied for several college programs already with my help, and 2 of them had required my financial information as part of the household data. I let her know that the household situation might be changing and asked her to flag his file. I did not do any of this to punish him. I want to be honest about my own motives because I've had years now to look at this from every angle. I did it because the math was simple. If I was not his real parent, then these were not my obligations. He had said so himself. He had real family now, actual family, people who were not just grandmothers filling in for a decade because no one else would. Fine, let actual family handle it. I told him over breakfast the next morning. I kept my voice even. I told him I had thought about what he said and that I respected his right to make choices about his life and that I supported his relationship with his father. I also told him that I had removed him from my phone plan, effective at the end of the billing cycle in 3 weeks, that I was canceling the insurance on the Camry at the end of the month, which meant he would need to arrange his own coverage or stop driving it, and that the college savings account would remain frozen until I could speak with a financial advisor about how to proceed, given the change in his living situation. He stared at me. "You're taking away my car," he said. "I'm removing myself from the insurance on a vehicle that is registered in your name," I said. "The car is yours. The insurance was mine. I'm no longer responsible for it." He pushed back from the table. His chair scraped the floor. "This is because of what I said." I said, "It's because of what you said and what it means. If I'm your grandmother and not your parent, then I have a grandmother's obligations. I'll always love you. I'll always be here if you need me. But I'm not going to continue spending money on a young man who has decided he has a real parent to do that." His face went through several things at once. He said, "Dad will cover it." I said, "I'm sure he will. Have a good day at school." He called his father that afternoon. I know because I heard the conversation through the wall, not the words, but the pitch of it. High and urgent, the way he used to sound when he was 10. And something had gone wrong on the playground. Dwayne called me an hour later. I let it go to voicemail. His message was civil, I'll give him that. He said he thought we could work this out, that there was no need to make Caleb's transition difficult, that he understood I was upset, but that this seemed like an overreaction. He used the word overreaction twice. I texted back one sentence. "If you'd like to discuss Caleb's expenses going forward, I'm available Tuesday evenings by phone." He did not call Tuesday. What happened instead was that Simone called. I did not recognize the number. She introduced herself warmly, the way people do when they want something, and said she just wanted to clear the air, that Dwayne wasn't trying to take anything away from me, that they just wanted what was best for Caleb. I said, "So do I. That's why I'm making sure he understands that choices have costs." She said she thought that was a little harsh for a teenager. I said, "I raised 3 children and a grandchild. I've been doing this longer than you've known his last name." She didn't have a response to that. The calls from Dwayne picked up over the following week. Some were frustrated, some were conciliatory, some were somewhere in between. He said Caleb was upset. I said I imagined so. He said this wasn't the way to handle it. I said I was open to hearing his approach. He didn't have one, because the approach he had been taking for 9 years was no approach at all. It was absence. And absence is easy until someone makes it expensive. My son Gary called from Portland and said, "Mom, you okay?" Word had gotten around the family the way it always does, sideways, through texts and hushed phone calls and vague posts that weren't quite vague enough. His aunt on Renata's side had apparently said something on Facebook about elderly people who confuse love with control. It got 11 likes. Gary said, "You did everything for that kid." I said, "I know. That's sort of the whole point." Caleb did not move to Atlanta in November. I don't know exactly what happened on that end, and honestly, I never asked. What I know is that the soccer club with the Scouts required a significant registration fee and a commitment to a travel schedule that Dwayne apparently hadn't fully thought through. I know that this school district in Buckhead was, in fact, excellent, but that transferring mid-junior year would have complicated Caleb's transcript in ways that affected certain scholarship applications he had already submitted. I know that Simone and Dwayne were in the middle of planning a wedding, and that an anxious, resentful teenager was probably not the addition to the household either of them had imagined when the plan sounded good in theory. None of that is me being satisfied about any of it. I'm telling you what happened, not what I hoped for. What I know for certain is that one Thursday evening in early December, Caleb came home from school, dropped his backpack by the door the way he always had, and stood in the kitchen doorway while I was doing a crossword at the table. He stood there for a long moment. I looked up. He said, "Can we talk?" I said, "Sit down." He sat in the chair across from me, the same chair he had sat in since he was 7 years old. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, and he was looking at them the way he used to look at his homework when he didn't want to admit he didn't understand something. He said, "I think I said something really wrong." I waited. He said, "I keep trying to figure out how to explain it without it sounding like an excuse and I can't. So I'm just going to say it was wrong and I'm sorry." I asked him where that came from. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My friend Marcus's mom. She heard what happened. I don't know who told her. And she pulled me aside at pickup last week and said, 'Do you understand what you said to your grandmother?' She looked me right in the eye and she said, 'That woman gave up the last years of her life so you could have a good start to yours. And you told her she wasn't real family. Do you know what that makes you?'" He stopped. His throat moved. He said she wasn't mean about it. She just said it like a fact. And I couldn't argue with it because it was true. I said, "What do you want, Caleb?" He looked up. He said, "I want you to still be my grandmother, my real one. Not because Dad didn't come through or because Atlanta didn't work out. Because you are. You have been this whole time, and I was too stupid and selfish to see it." I didn't say anything right away. He said, "I know you're not going to just say okay. I know I have to do something to show you I mean it. I just wanted to say it first." I looked at him for a long time. This boy I had known since he was 7 years old, who had cost me sleep and savings and the vegetable garden I never did get around to properly, who had once cried so hard about a broken toy that I had driven 40 minutes to 3 different stores until I found an identical one, who had learned to drive in an empty church parking lot on a Sunday morning because I was the one who was there. I said, "Then here's what showing it looks like." I gave him conditions, not punishments. I want to draw that line clearly because the difference matters. The first was a part-time job. He was 17, capable, and old enough to understand that the things he wanted required effort. I didn't care what kind of job. Stocking shelves, mowing lawns, working a register somewhere. Something that put money in his pocket that he had earned himself so that when he spent it, he understood what it represented. The second was grades. He had a 3.2 GPA at the time. I needed it at 3.5 or higher by the end of junior year if he wanted me to release any of the college savings. Not because I was punishing him. Because that money was supposed to be for a future, and a future required something to show for the years that built it. The third was simpler than both of those. I told him I needed him to be honest with me. Not perfect, not without conflict, just honest. If he was struggling, he could say so. If he disagreed with me, he could say so. What I could not accept again was a version of him that went behind my back and made unilateral decisions about our life together without saying a word until the damage was done. He nodded through all of it. When I finished, he didn't argue or negotiate. He said, "Okay." Then he said, "Do you want me to start dinner?" I said, "Do you even know how to make dinner?" He said, "I've been watching you do it for 10 years. I probably know more than you think." He made spaghetti that night. He burned the garlic bread and oversalted the sauce and apologized for both things 3 separate times. I ate every bite and told him it was fine. He rolled his eyes a little, the way teenagers do when they know you're being generous, and I thought, there he is. There's the boy I've been missing. It has been almost 2 years since that night. Caleb graduated in June. He's at a state university now, about 4 hours away, studying exercise science. He wants to coach someday. High school. Maybe college. He says he wants to be the kind of adult who shows up for kids who need it. I heard him say that on the phone to his friend, not to me. I wasn't meant to overhear it. I pretended I hadn't. He got a job at a sporting goods store in the spring of his senior year. He kept it through graduation, saved enough to cover his first semester's textbooks without asking me for $1. He called to tell me that himself, and there was something in his voice. Not pride exactly, more like surprise at his own capability, that I hadn't heard before and hoped to keep hearing. His father and Simone did get married. They invited Caleb to the wedding, and he went. He came home and said it was fine. They seemed happy. The food was good. He didn't say anything else about it, and I didn't ask, because that part of his life is his to navigate. Renata sent a card for his graduation, a store-bought one with a printed message inside and 3 lines in her handwriting. I'm so proud of you. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I love you. He read it at the kitchen table and sat quietly for a few minutes, then folded it and put it in his dresser drawer. He didn't cry. He didn't say anything terrible. He just sat with it, the way adults do when something is complicated and you've stopped needing it to be simple. I was proud of him for that. He called last Sunday from his dorm. He always calls Sundays now, has since the first week of school. Sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's an hour. We talk about his classes and his teammates and the food in the dining hall, which he claims is terrible, but which I suspect is better than he lets on. Sometimes we don't talk about anything in particular. We just check in. Last week he said, I've been thinking about what I'm going to do for Thanksgiving. I said, what are your options? He said, well, I could go to Atlanta. I said, yes, you could. He said, but I was kind of thinking I'd just come home. I didn't say anything right away. I looked out my kitchen window at the garden where the tomatoes had come in better this year than any year I can remember. I've had the time to tend it properly now. I've had the time to do a lot of things. I said, there will be pot roast. He said, that's exactly why I'm coming home. I put the phone down after we hung up and stood there in the kitchen for a moment, in the particular quiet of a house that has been a home for a long time. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of stillness. The kind that settles in when things are, at last, the way they were always supposed to be. I thought about the garbage bag, the stuffed dog with one eye, the sewing room I gave up and never once regretted giving. I thought about what it costs to love someone fully when the world keeps asking you to prove you're qualified. Then I started a grocery list, because Sunday was 6 days away and I had a lot to get ready. I've thought a lot about what people mean when they use the word real family, real parent, real home. People throw that word around like it's a measurement, like there's some instrument you can hold up to a relationship and take a reading. Like 9 years of showing up counts for less than the last name on a birth certificate. What I know, and what I've had time to sit with, is that Caleb didn't say what he said because he believed it. He said it because he'd been handed the story that was easier than the truth, and at 16, easier is very appealing. Dwayne walked in with a nice car and wide-open weekends and none of the history. No arguments about homework. No consequences for skipped chores. No memory of the hard years. He got to be the good part, which is a very comfortable thing to be when someone else has already done everything else. That's not an accident. That's how it works when someone has been absent long enough to become a fantasy. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because I think it's important to name the mechanics of what happened clearly, without dressing it up. Caleb was not a bad kid. He was a kid who got confused about the difference between what felt good and what was real. And those two things can look identical when you're 17 and someone is handing you Jordans and telling you you're special. What he had to learn, and what I couldn't teach him by talking, was that choices have weight. That walking away from something solid in pursuit of something shiny is a transaction, and like all transactions, it costs something. I didn't take away the insurance and the phone plan to hurt him. I did it because I had spent 9 years trying to protect him from the natural consequences of other people's choices, and he had just told me in plain language that I wasn't his family. I believed him enough to act accordingly. That is not cruelty, that is respect. Treating someone like they mean what they say is one of the more serious forms of taking them seriously. The part I didn't expect, and that I've thought about more than anything else, is what it took for him to come back. Not Dwayne falling through. Not the soccer club falling apart. Not any of the external things that crumbled when the fantasy met reality. What brought Caleb back was a woman he barely knew, his friend's mother, who looked him in the eye and told him the truth without softening it. A stranger did what I had not been able to do, not because I didn't know the words, but because he couldn't hear them from me yet. There is something humbling about that. There is also something worth understanding in it. Sometimes the people we love most cannot receive what we're offering, not because it isn't good, but because they're not yet standing in the right place to see it. You cannot force that. You can only hold your ground, stay true to what you know is right, and trust that eventually the world will do some of the teaching for you. Caleb is doing that teaching himself now. I watch him move through his days with a steadiness he didn't have before, and I think that steadiness came from the fall. From the moment when everything he thought he was reaching for turned out to be thinner than it looked, and he had to figure out who he actually was without any of the props. That is not a small thing to survive. And surviving it with honesty, choosing to come home and say I was wrong rather than pretend it never happened, took more courage than anything else I watched him do in 17 years. I'll take the pot roast over a Challenger with custom rims every single time.